Exchange Online is the first and usually most important workload that's brought over to Microsoft 365. It's usually the thing that got everybody to migrate and host everything in the online environment. Usually that's the workload that we bring from on-prem first to that M365, and one of the most important ones from a security standpoint. It's one of the most targeted workloads, as well as a lot of risky information is stored in Exchange Online. So we really need to take some care and make sure we're protecting that workload specifically in our M365 environment. So today I'm going to talk about that. This is going to be, the next in the series of Just Do the Basics securing your M365. And I really want to talk about the Exchange Online specific controls that are easy to implement and that can really increase the security. Not going to focus on anything else other than things that are specific to Exchange Online. So some Exchange Online protocols, some risky override configuration that I see often, audit logging, all those type of things. And we're going to explore some of them and talk about some settings you should definitely look at implementing and putting some blocks in place All right. So hope this video helps you. Let's hop into the configs. All right, so the first control that I really want to talk about, help you secure your Exchange Online environment, is legacy authentication. If you look at this chart here, you'll see from 2020, Microsoft compromise rate by protocol, that this list here is all legacy protocols that are on an Exchange Online that hackers will use to target your end users. So really big impetus to disable all of that. It's so big, in fact, that Microsoft has been announcing for about 2 years that they're going to disable it for everybody in Exchange Online. And so at the end of this year, and probably by the time this video is out, legacy auth should be disabled for it. But one of the things under the hood is that Microsoft is not turning off every possible version of legacy auth. So I'm sure there are still going to be things that are not protected, even though when Microsoft does its disablement of a lot of those sets of features. So it's important to put in those controls now to protect yourself and really help with getting you access to more sets of those features. So to do that, what we need to do is go to admin.microsoft.com, and under org settings here, we can go down to modern authentication. And this is the best way to disable those features. But before we just turn them off, we really need to do some auditing to see, is anybody in our environment still using it? If we disable it, if come January 1st, if Microsoft turns it off, are you going to have any users yelling at you? We need to find that out before we turn this feature on. So once this loads, you'll be able to see this portal here. But while we wait for that, what we can do is do our audits of this environment. Here it is. So these are all of the considered legacy authentication portals that end users can use. And the list is getting shorter as Microsoft turns off some of these features, but this is the best way to turn it off. You can see in my environment, I have IMAP and POP3 and authenticated SMTP off, as those are the #1 targeted protocols, but you're going to want to turn off more. So how do you audit your environment to do that? Well, in your Exchange Online or Azure Active Directory, we have a really nice sign-in log history of everybody that's using those protocols. So if you log into your Azure Active Directory and go to your sign-in logs, you'll be presented with all of the sign-ins that are related to your entire environment. What's the nice feature is that if you go to add a filter here and then client app, we can directly target those legacy auth protocols in our environment. So if you look at this, you'll see here is a 1-for-1 lineup reporting on who's using what protocols in here. So if you come to this and you're thinking, I want to know who's actually using this in my environment, you can come in, just check these boxes and hit apply. And now this will filter all of your audit logs to just these protocols that are considered legacy. Why are they legacy? Well, it's because they don't support MFA, and that's the reason why Microsoft wants to get rid of them. And again, the targeted attack from users. So in this list, you'll see probably a lot of different noise from in your environment. You'll see a combination of success and failures, right? If you see success, that means that someone's getting in and accessing your environment using that protocol. If you see a ton of failures, it might be a hacker doing some penetration testing on your environment, looking to figure out who's using that password, who's it's available, or where it's available at. So you should be able to go down this list and filter on the protocols that you want to turn off and see specifically, is anybody using those, right? And so for my environment, I'm going to come in and say, okay, who in my environment is using authenticated SMTP, right? So we'll filter just on that. And here I can see in this demo environment, I have the CH sandbox user that's using it. And I can see successes and failures. All right, so I know that before I go and turn off that protocol specifically, I want to get in there and make sure this account is provisioned correctly and that I have a game plan for transferring them over to a supported protocol going forward. But if I come into this environment and said, you know what, I want to enable or disable IMAP or POP, I can come into this and see, okay, no one's using that in the last month. That's a good sign for me, right? You can come in and filter all of this kind of stuff down and add in that one. You can also come in here and filter on success or failures. So if you don't see a lot of successes, or if you see only failures in your environment and no successful sign-ins, that's a good sign that no one's actually using that protocol. Again, it might just be a hacker. If you have a long list of only failures to sign in using that, it just might be a hacker trying to, get into your environment. So go through this audit logging process. The quick, easy wins is if you see no one using any of these protocols that are successfully signing in, you can come into this portal in the admin center and uncheck the box and turn it off. And that's really going to be the best way to secure your environment. There is, of course, legacy. You can also target legacy auth with conditional access, but I prefer this method because it's more of a root block of those protocols instead of doing a conditional access set of policies. Either one is okay to do as a good block, but move it over to this one. Think of it as a pre-authentication block using this method versus conditional access is a post-authentication. So after someone successfully, guesses the password right, it'll come to conditional access and say, oh, that's the right password, but you're blocked, right? And so we want to eliminate the hackers from guessing our end user's password, using this as a password spray, and then getting to conditional access and saying, oh, it's actually their correct password. Now they know it. So if you use this option, it's just blocked before they even try to authenticate with the protocol. And it actually cut down on your audit logs and looking through, all those failures and success histories. So that's legacy auth option. I know that was a quick video. One other note is if you do have a specific service account that you want to disable or enable specifically for an individual user, right? So if I came into this one and said CH Sandbox needs authenticated SMTP, this same option here creates a default authentication policy in Exchange Online PowerShell. And so if you need a specific one, if you need to enable a specific user to use one of those protocols, you can just use PowerShell and target that one user, create a policy just for them that enables one of these protocols, and that can really cut down on that security option. So it's a new authentication policy in Exchange Online PowerShell. The second set of controls I want to talk about for Exchange Online is risky overrides of your anti-spam and inbound connection filter policy. What we've seen a lot over the years is organizations that bring themselves or their systems from on-prem or from third-party solutions will oftentimes bring over a lot of the old configs that they used in those other environments. And that's great for a lot of things, except for Exchange Online. A lot of those decisions, those config overrides that they'll choose to bring over are really risky configs in the Microsoft environment. And so what I see a ton is you'll migrate to Office 365 or EOP or MDO, the email security solutions by Microsoft, but you'll see a ton of spam, a lot of phishing come through the solution. And it's usually because choices that you've made as an organization or just historical buildup of override policies. So the ways that we address that is going into security.microsoft policies and rules, threat policies, and then the anti-spam policies are the number one area that I really want you to focus on. And the first and most important is the connection filter policy. What I see a lot is that this IP allow list gets built up over time or with a migration, and you'll have, thousands of emails coming through your system without the filter policy being turned on for it, without it checking for spam. Microsoft has come in and they're basically coming in and saying, for some things, we're not even going to let the end user override this or use an admin override this, but it's still a good thing to get in front of and put in this and turn off this setting, disable anything in here that is an IP allow. It's not saying you're going to block that email from coming through. It's just simply saying, hey, let's filter it through the email security solution. Let's check it for risky emails and that thing. So this is the most important one to check. I also recommend disabling the Microsoft Safe List. This is essentially, again, the same idea, but it's a Microsoft trusted one. And even Microsoft recommends turning it off now in their own best practice guide that they follow. And so these are the two ones that I would turn off by default. Okay. The other one that I'm going to really recommend you look at is this anti-spam inbound policy. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom here, and again, this is a legacy config, is that you'll see there's an allowed sender and allowed domain list. And again, over time, this can build up and you can have hundreds of thousands of email domains allowed to be put in here. The most risky of this allowed domains is going to be your personal one, right? They even added in this things, right? If someone's spoofing that domain, they will also be allowed through. So you really want to be very careful about adding to this list. I actually recommend most all of the people that I work with disable this list entirely, have nothing on this list, and only use it for those things. So this is the most risky of the configs, where you see your own domain on this allowed through list. That basically means anybody in the world can spoof your own domain to send to your end users. And so that's really risky config that you want to address and put in place. Well, but how do you audit that beforehand, right? You don't want to just go in and say, hi, what's the impact? Forget it, let's just turn it off. Maybe you do, but most orgs don't. So what you can actually do is you can run some KQL queries of your environment and to figure out how big the issue is in your environment, how many things are being allowed through. And so I actually have some KQL queries that I wrote a while ago and some sample outputs of what that would look like on my blog. And I'll put a link to it in here. But you really want to look at this email events table and you can come in and summarize by the org level policy types. So you can come in and say, okay, we had 50,000 email addresses that was allowed through because of the connection filtering policy, or because of the domain safe sender list, or maybe it was a personal end user safe sender list. So we can query, either the entire organization. We can also configure user level overrides, right? Both are important to check, right? I actually helped an organization that had, via group policy, added a ton of accidental user level overrides to their Exchange Online environment. And so they were pushing into their Exchange the same level of org configs as the end user, as to the end user level. And so they were overriding all of the security that MDO and Exchange Online were using. So these queries can come in, help you identify that. And you'll see I have some samples of what those items are, but just remember, they all go back to the same anti-spam set of policies that we were looking at before, where the end user puts it in place. And so that's config number 2 in Exchange Online that you really need to lock down and put in place. Exchange Online security basic number 3 that I really want you to look at is going to be your audit logging capabilities. Really important for a security investigation and just generally knowing what's happening in your environment is to have audit logging turned on in your environment. So to do that, what we need to do is double check it by coming into compliance.microsoft.com and go to the audit section here. If you see in this big, if you see a bar across the top here that says audit logging is disabled, turn it on, you really need to come in and turn that feature set on. The next step is setting up a retention policy. How long should you retain those audit retention policies for? And you can come over here to this audit retention policy section and turn it on. By default, I believe if you have an M365 E3 license, you get 90 days of audit log retention. If you have an E5 license, you can turn on a 1-year policy to enable audit logging for a full 1 year. And then they also have a specialty license where you can enable audit logging for a full 10 years in the Microsoft solution. Really important to set up an audit retention policy for these policies, just so that you can know how much data you're storing in your environment. No additional cost for using it, so you should really set up that at least 90 days or 1 year if you have an E5 licensing. How you do it is essentially you're going to set up a name of the policy, and then what you want to do is you need to come down to this record type and select what records that you're going to come through. I wish they had a select all button. Unfortunately, they don't. once you target all these workloads, just know that if you don't put a username in here that you're targeting, it just means it's targeting everyone. So no harm. You don't need to put in everybody's name, but you do need to check the boxes for all of these accounts. I'm sure there's a PowerShell way to do it, but I just don't have a quick script to do that for y'all. Just check the box and then set an order priority of 0 or 1 for that policy. I think I actually have to do 1 for that policy. And then you have audit retention set up. Now, that seems great, seems easy. Turn on audit, set up retention, and you're done. But that's not the full story of what you need to do to ensure your audit logging is turned on. One of the configs that I've experienced and messed up myself is when I migrated from Exchange on-prem, I had audit logging disabled in my on-prem mailbox, or my on-prem. And so as my mailboxes moved to cloud, some of my audit logging didn't get turned on in the Microsoft 365 environment. A lot of the defaults weren't there, they were all turned off, and it was turned off on a per user mailbox. So we need to also audit our auditing capability and say, is every user enabled for audit logging, and are all of the default settings turned on? So to do that, we're going to actually resort to PowerShell for that capability. And so I have a script here that I'll put a link in the chat on. And it's basically enumeration, remove the limits, and then run a get mailbox command. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through all of your mailboxes and output for you a script of what auditing is turned on for your environment or for on a per user, if there's a specific end user audit retention age set, and then as well as the specifics of what is enabled for each of the options in here. And so you can see auditing is a very complex thing to turn on in your environment. What you really want to look for, the two key kind of components here, is that auditing is enabled for true for all of the end user mailboxes. You'll see here I have some items where it's not turned on and I can't turn them on. Those are just under the hood Microsoft policies that you don't manage. They're not really your mailboxes. They're just stuff that exists in the environment. But everything else in your environment, all of your mailboxes should have that auditing turned on. The other thing to note and to look at is your policies showing all of the kind of default categories in your mailbox. Microsoft has a blog that they wrote about managing all of those advanced auditing and making sure you have it turned on here. This is the link to that one. So this is what should be on, what is auditable, right? And then what's on by default for a mailbox. This is all the things that you can, should be on by default for your mailbox. And so you'll just want to go through that audit log and check to make sure that you have everything that's on by default, actually on by default. It's a little bit of a cumbersome process to audit that, but it's not terrible. The other thing to note is if you moved from E3 to E5, and this is a really big value add for E5, is this mail items access record is available for E5 users. So if you wanted to know when a hacker, what emails specifically a hacker or an end user access in your mailbox, this E5 technology will answer that question. So if you have a compromise of a user, you don't have to just assume everything in that mailbox was compromised. You can actually use mail items access to see the specific emails that were accessed by that hacker in the time period that they had. There's some limitations to it. There is a default, like a cap of how much audit logging it can do for a mailbox. So if an end user hacker downloads, 1 billion emails out of it, it does cap how many in like an hour that it can do. So there's some gotchas with it, but it's still a really good feature set to have on and turned on in your environment. To make it easy, I also went and wrote a PowerShell script that just checks and then just enables all possible audit logging in your environment. It's not the default one. It basically goes through and says, this is auditable. Maybe it's not on by default, like folder bind isn't on by default. It just comes in and says, yep, turn it on for the entire environment. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, so that you can grab those scripts and check your audit logging first, see if it's enabled. And if you want, you can use this global enable option. Fourth security basic for Exchange Online is outbound forwarding. You want to turn off outbound forwarding or audit who's doing outbound forwarding of your organization. Who's set up something in your environment to say, every email I get, send it over to my personal Gmail. Send it over to, this other thing, this Ymail. Send it over to my third-party company. Or the really big one that you want to watch out for is when a hacker gets access to your mailbox, they'll oftentimes, instead of accessing it continuously, they'll just set up a forwarder to a fake Gmail or fake Ymail or something like that that looks like your end users, and they'll sit in the mailbox and just monitor it until it's the right time to intercept. And so we'll see this happen oftentimes with a wire, a bank teller or something like that, where they're going to get in the middle and tell, for a real estate agency, tell your broker, oh yeah, here's the wiring instructions. And the hacker will send wiring instructions and it'll trick you into wiring all of your money to the wrong account versus, your escrow account or something like that. So we really want to get in there and audit your auto forwarding capability and make sure no one's using that. And then we want to turn it off afterwards. So to do that, how do we audit it? Well, Microsoft has a handy report, and you can go to admin.exchange.microsoft.com, and you'll see up here in the top right-hand corner, 0 auto forwarding messages. And that's great. That's what we want in our environment. We don't want really anybody using it. You can also see this under the reports, auto forwarding message report, and this will show you who's using all of those kind of capabilities in your environment. If you had a specific like help desk, service or customer service mailbox, that might be appropriate time to use auto forwarding. But if you see an end user forwarding all of your emails to their Gmail or personal, that's something we don't necessarily always want, or at least you should have control over who's doing it and get approvals before they're allowed to use that feature. So that's the feature set that we really want to look at. Audit it first, always, right? And then how do you turn it off? The best way to turn it off, and we've had a lot of different ways. We used to be able to do it transport rule, but the best way now is actually to come into policies and rules, and then threat policies and your anti-spam policies again. And in here, there is a specific outbound filter policy. And this is the best way because of one key reason is that if you turn off automatic forwarding here, it disables forwarding as well as redirects. If you had done it via transport rule previously, redirects weren't always supported for a block via, mail or exchange flows, right? It wouldn't actually block the redirect. So if you use it here, this is the best way to turn off that feature and block an end user from, sending that auto forwarder. Of course, in your environment, you're going to want to come in and have, if you have people that need to do auto forwarding, like again, your help desk system or an ERP where you need that email automatically forwarded off, you set up a secondary one, and then you can come into this and just set up, okay, that end user mailbox is allowed to do your forwarding, allowed to send it to, outside of the organization automatically. And so that's kind of the best control to put in place to block that outbound forwarding. And you can see here, even Microsoft is, putting in a big note on it for that auto forwarding of, monitor data leaks automatically, right? That's a big issue, right? We've seen a lot of hackers compromise environments and immediately set up an auto forwarder. So it's important to get ahead of it and block that. If you wanted to go to the next level, there is actually a way in Exchange you can disable even having that feature show in the user mailbox. It doesn't solve it for a end user rule. They can still do it via rule. So even though you can take it away from their mailbox view items option, it's still best to do it in this capability here. All right, so next security basic, and this is going to be a low-hanging fruit, easy win one for you, to turn on external user tagging of messages, and as well as mail tips for when end users are sending messages, right? So if a hacker came in and compromised or was trying to trick your end users and say, hey, I'm, Judy, can you buy me, $500 worth of credit cards because I'm the CFO, and they send it to an end user, what we can do is enable a little bit more intelligence to help and give our end users a fighting chance that they're sending an email to someone outside of our organization, right? And so one of these options that you can turn on is this following recipient is outside of our organizations. Very helpful for also, tab autofill where you clicked on the wrong Doug Baker and put in the wrong external user versus the internal user, and it helps give you that fighting chance. And then again, if a hacker is responding to someone outside of the organization, or an end user is responding to a hacker who's outside of the organization that using a mailbox that looks like your CFO's, personal Gmail, it'll give the end user a fighting chance to say, oh, that's their external one. Let me make sure I'm actually emailing the right person. So I really like this feature of turning it on. The second optional hidden one that you can turn on that's very new is this external tagging capability inside of Exchange Online and now Exchange for your Outlook Thick client. And so you can actually put on this tag and say, oh, this came from an external user. And I know this is a little cheesy, but I think it really helps end users. I've seen it help my end users detect, oh, that's actually not the boss, right? That's not the end user that I thought it was. It's someone external. So I really recommend enabling this external email tag option as well. How you do that in both of these situations is again going to be PowerShell in your environment. So what you need to do is run the command get organizational config and then select mail tips. And what you can see is external mail tips is most likely in your environment disabled or set to false. And so you just run the same get config or set config and you can enable that in true. And that's going to be the pop-up option. So as they're replying to the end user, that'll give them that, oh, this is an external user one. That's not the same as this external tag one. To do that one, you actually need to go and run get-external. External in Outlook. And this will actually show, if this feature is turned on. One of the interesting things with this is that you sometimes need to not have that external tag on external email. So maybe it's a sister company. You can actually set it as enabled for the entire org and then set allow lists, right? So if you wanted that CFO's email that's using his personal to not show that as external tab, or more appropriately for a sister organization and not have that show as, an external entity, you can come in and mark that other whole domain as an allow list or a specific one. So again, a simple, easy to use one can really help save your end users that embarrassment of saying, oh, I bought that gift card for someone, can give them a fighting chance. The final Exchange Online security basic that I want you to consider enabling for your end users is a report phishing button. This can be a Microsoft one. This could be a third party. I really think it's important to have an option for your end users in whatever portal they're in to have a quick, easy way to report that this is spam, that this is phishing in your environment. Microsoft has a built-in one that you can take advantage of. To deploy it, it's just going to be in your admin.microsoft portal, right? So if we come to admin.microsoft.com, and then under add-ins, we can actually just come in and auto deploy that out to your organization. So org settings, where did they move it to? Always moving. Integrated apps. They changed the name, Integrated Apps. Integrated Apps is the new way to get that deployed out. And so you can come in and deploy this report phishing or report junk. If it's not showing in this list for you, you just come to Get Apps and you can just search for it from the Microsoft admin store and then deploy it out to the end users. And that's a quick way to get that up and running, get some reporting. I really like this feature from Microsoft. It does play to the overall MDO strategy or Microsoft Defender for Office strategy for reporting messages and automating the response to it. So if you're using MDO and you're not using the report phishing buttons or report message button from Microsoft, I would highly switch you over to that. You also want to come in and do a secondary config after you deploy this to your end users, because this will report phishing to Microsoft, which will help. But you also want to get a report of that. So under security.microsoft.com, we can also set up a folder and say, I actually want to get the response of all of those emails as well. And I want to get a copy of every time the end user does that. So it's down here under settings. And then there is a report phishing option in here. So I believe it's under email and collaborations and user reported. And so we can come into this user reported section and customize the config. And then we can also have this reports send a message to Microsoft and myself. So we can get a copy and take maybe secondary action on that of saying, hey, let's go delete that. Or maybe we have a bigger issue because those end users reported it. And so you can customize that options as well with them. So good option to take advantage of and help protect your end users. So that's it for the video on Exchange Online security basics. I hope these wasn't too many items to cover, and I hope you gave you some tangible quick wins that you can look at to help secure your Exchange Online environment. As always, if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out, and good luck and stay safe out there.